There we go. Waiting for the notification of recording. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Maryland Commission on Hate Crime Response and Prevention meeting. Today is November 13, 2025. My name is Zanita Hurley, and I am chairing today's meeting on behalf of Attorney General Brown. I want to thank all of you for being here and for all of the work that I know you all have been doing since we last convened back in September. I'm sure you all saw that since we last meet, MSP released its 2024 report on hate activity in the state of Maryland. And while there was a decrease in the reported incidents of hate between 2023 and 2024, the numbers still remain disturbingly high given the 103% increase we saw between 2022 and 2023. And so, of course, we also continue to be concerned that these figures are likely an undercount relative to hate activity in the state. As you all know, although the state requires law enforcement to report both hate crimes and hate-biased incidents, many incidents remain unreported, and often because victims don't believe that reporting will make a difference. We have heard, especially now, that a lot of Marylanders are concerned that federal hate crimes and federal anti-discrimination laws are no longer going to be enforced under this administration, and that hate groups feel emboldened by federal policies. Our office, of course, remains dedicated to protecting the rights of all Marylanders, regardless of the administration's priorities, in many ways through litigation, resource development, and advocacy, and of course, through the work of this body. In the past few months, all 5 committees and our work group has met and continued the important work of solidifying our goals and action items for this year. And so again, thank you for this vital work and taking the time to convene outside of our quarterly commission meetings. The committee meetings are an important way to address and prevent hate in Maryland outside of our full commission meetings. And today we'll have an opportunity to talk about the recommendations from the committee and the work that's going to be reported out in our second annual report. I also want to thank you all for supporting our office's work in combating hate through the DOJ grant that we received. The grant just ended this past September. And notwithstanding the end of the grant, we still, of course, remain dedicated to finishing the work of the grant, and particularly the series of regional hate crimes training forums that were begun with the support of the grant. And that training, of course, is done in partnership with the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights. So we thank them for their work and joining us with that. We have just one more regional training forum to conduct, actually, in the what we consider the upper and mid Eastern Shore. We learned that Eastern Shore is pretty large, and we need to do 2 forums to cover that region. And so we've we finished the southern Eastern Shore, and now hopefully in the spring, the plan is to host with MCCR and local partners the upper and mid Eastern Shore Forum. And then once we've done that, we would have gone to every region within the state, recognizing that these are just the first of what we hope to be continuing conversations. That is a significant accomplishment, and we want to thank you all for your support in helping us to do that work. The other part of the grant that I'm sure you all are eager to see the final product of is the online hate crimes training platform that Maryland State Police is leading that work. That is also funded by the Department of Justice grant. They hired a vendor earlier this year, X is Possible. I think a number of you were interviewed by X is Possible, their team, and contributed, gave your feedback and insight into what the scope of the training and what you think, your community's partners, stakeholders, constituents, et cetera, would like to see as an outcome of that training that is going to be focused on law enforcement, police officers, our state's attorneys' offices, and those who are involved in entering the data that feeds into that state police annual report. Once we receive official approval from DOJ, we hope to submit the final training program to the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission. As you might suspect, due to the federal government shutdown, that approval process has been delayed. But the work on our side has continued, and I am pleased to report that we are very near completion. Just a little bit of, bells and whistles, crossing the T's and dotting the I's in terms of wrapping up that online training portal. And we'll be excited to let you know when that has been finalized and submitted for approval. With regard to our work in preparation for the 2026 legislative session, remains an exciting time for the commission. Of course, last year with our first report, we recommended a change to the statute and we introduced legislation. Unfortunately, it wasn't successful, but it did teach us some lessons in terms of our approach for next session. So we'll be talking to you a little bit more about that. And Jennifer's going to talk about how we hope to build upon that foundation that we laid with the first annual report. We do think that those recommendations in terms of updating the definition of sexual orientation and creating in statute a formal definition for hate bias incidents, that remains important reforms to assist us in the work that we do. And so we will be working to reintroduce those bills. And then before I turn things over to Jennifer, I'm sorry. I know that this is our final meeting for the calendar year, and that there are some commissioners who will not be returning in the new year. Earlier this year, it was our first time having to bring half of this body nearly before the Senate for approval, because we were reconstituted. And any of you who have been sort of part of these bodies understand that, once you create a commission, you start with staggered terms. And so some of those terms are already expiring. And for those of you whose terms were expiring, we typically offer everyone an opportunity to come back. And we understand that for a myriad of reasons, individuals may choose not to return. But we thank you for your contributions for this past year and look forward to seeing you in whatever capacity you continue to do this work. This is important work, and we know that the benefit of this commission is having representation from so many different perspectives, and that is what makes this commission so unique and critical in terms of the recommendations that we develop for the key policymakers in this area. And so with that in mind, I will now turn things over to Jennifer. Hopefully all of you have the agenda. We're going to get things started with an overview of the report. And I think you have a PowerPoint presentation to share to that end. Is that correct?
I do. I have way too much data to point to that I cannot share that outside of a PowerPoint. So give me just a moment and I will pull up my screen so that y'all can see it. There we go. Okay. I'm assuming this can be seen, correct?
Yes.
Awesome. Let me put this in 2%, maybe. So I'm going to go through the layout of the report minus the recommendations for the first part, just so that we can split this up a little bit, because otherwise it gets really, really long. So first off, I wanted to start with our accomplishments. This is the commission's first full year of being able to sit down and get to work without reconstitution, without starting anew. So this was a really exciting time for all of us. A couple of the accomplishments we've seen in this last year, despite the fact that, like Zanita mentioned, our recommendations did not pass last year. It was really exciting to be able to get commissioners together to go to Annapolis and speak on why this bill was important, and also to see a lot of the testimony that was submitted from other community groups as well as commissioners and individuals across the state in support of that. This bill had a lot of support, even though it didn't pass, and we learned some really valuable lessons that we look forward to taking into the new year. We also established the Hate Bias Incident Working Group for trying to figure out a way to gather reports and share resources to people that are reporting non-criminal acts of hate, so that local law enforcement can focus more on handling crimes as they occur, and so that we can also make sure that people who are impacted by hate can get the resources that we need. And that's going to be great work to continue into the new year. We also, I'm realizing I saw legislative session and got these mixed up. We confirmed 14 people this year, which was really exciting. Everybody made it through the confirmation process that went before the state Senate. And now we do not have to put 14 people all at once in front of the state Senate again. We can do this a little bit at a time. And it was great to see everybody go there and talk about why they want to be part of this commission and advocates for eradicating hate in the state of Maryland. We have also conducted 3 commission meetings, including this one. And finally, the grant activities that Zanita was talking about a minute ago. We've maintained our online reporting and resource portal that we launched last year. We've continued conducting our hate bias reporting forums, which we will finish up in the spring of next year. And we've also been developing the law enforcement training platform that we are putting a bow on so that we can get it approved by the DOJ and then by the Training Commission for Maryland State Police, which very exciting. It's been great to see all of these things get done and to see all of the support, not only amongst commissioners that are doing this advocacy work, but also amongst community involved along the way. The pictures you see here are actually from both of our forums this year. So very exciting, one in Anne Arundel County and the other on the southern eastern shore. So on the note of our portal, as well as our hate crimes hotline and our Stop Hate email, we have gathered a lot of data in the last 2 years. So I'm going to go through 2024 and 2025. The report will also contain the information from the partial year in 2023. So that will be within the report that y'all can see and that everybody else can see at a later date. But to get started with 2024, we last year, as many of y'all are aware, we cut the data at the end of October so that we can make sure we have time to gather all of our numbers for the report when it's due December 1. So this is a graph of submissions over time. This includes the hotline, the portal, and the email. So you see a huge spike in November. That was immediately following the election. There was a number of racist text messages sent out across the state, and accordingly, we saw a huge spike of reports to our office. The spike you see from May to June is the reporting portal went live on June 6th. So that explains those huge jumps, as there's been a lot of outreach done, and there has also been some outside events that we can see impacting the reports we received. Additionally, I've managed to break this up by county where the reports came from. This graph, importantly, does not reflect where no location was indicated, as that is 113 submissions, and it makes the graph really difficult to read. So I like to include that information so that y'all can be aware of where folks have decided not to share where they are located, as since we are not an official reporting mechanism like Maryland State Police, people don't have to share that information with us, and we can still offer them resources in return. There was 113 of those people. There was also 26 reports that were referred to another unit. Sometimes people reach out to our office through the hate crimes hotline, as it's easy to find, but it's not necessarily an act of hate. Sometimes they need the Consumer Protection Division, for example, and we will direct them that way so they can get the assistance that they are seeking, even though they are not in quite the right place yet. There we go. And then I've also managed to break it down by protected class. So doing this, we took out any of the reports that either did not have an indicated protected class. Again, people can give as much or as little information as they want when they call us. Also, we don't manage to get in contact with everybody. So there are many people who call us that we end up leaving a voicemail for with some generic advice about contacting law enforcement in an act of hate. And as such, we do not know exactly what happened and are not able to identify a protected class. I also do not include any reports that came from out of state in this graph because it makes the data unbalanced it doesn't reflect the Marylanders that are reaching out to us. So there are 125 reports from 2024 that are not included here. This graph specifically shows 173 different motivations for 135 total reports. So 135 incidents make up this graph. As you can see, much like the Maryland Coordination and Analysis Center, race, as well as sexual orientation and religion tend to make up the most of the reports made to our office. That is pretty standard across the country. So
is it sexual orientation that makes up the most, or is it the, I think you meant the gender and gender identity, right? Or those, because those are broken down.
They are broken down. Yellow is religion, and yeah, so gender identity and then also sexual orientation, when you combine those, they tend to make up the biggest part. I think it's 2025 where that's clearer of what I was saying, but yeah, that's a good point, Deb. We do see a small number of reports about homelessness and disability, as well as across the protected classes. Currently, we are not able to break these down further, though that is a future goal of creating better data analysis so that we can share that with everybody about what comes into our office.
Yeah.
And finally, for 2024, this is how people contacted us. You'll notice that the majority of this is the hotline. Please keep in mind that our Stop Hate email did not go live until the end of 2023, and the portal did not go live until June of 2024. So this is still not a full year of all of these resources being available for people to reach out to our office. However, and I will note this now, between 2024 and 2025, people seem to call the hotline the most. The hotline is also the oldest by a substantial bit, as we launched it in 2016. So some of that might be that it's just, that's what people know what to contact. Marketing, we're still doing education around the portal and the hotline, the portal and the email, but we do still get a substantial number of reports through the hotline. However, 94 reports is not a small number or a small proportion, especially for a portal that was only live for half of the year. 2025, this only goes through the end of October, which is a very important point. I don't want to include incomplete data for November in here, and I would not have the time on December 1 when our report is due to do that. So we will see November and December of this year in next year's annual report. We saw a little bit more consistency in the 2025 reports. You can see during the spring, in the winter and the spring, they tended to still remain high, and then kind of even out as we went through the year. So it's a little bit more of a stable graph than we saw last year, which makes sense. We've started to do outreach. People are more aware of where they can report, how they can report, and all of that. So leading into submissions by county, this graph one does not reflect counties where there are no reports. There were 74 submissions where no location was indicated. So there's a little bit lower at this time than last year. The one thing I will note actually between these two graphs is we are on track to have more reports this year than we did last year. We will see how that plays out in the final 2 months of this year. But if we look at only through the end of October of 2024, we end up with slightly more reports. However, we also saw that huge spike in November of 2024. So we will see what happens. Again, we still see a number of out-of-state reports. Part of that is because when you look up a hate crimes hotline, our office comes up fairly high in the search results, which is a great thing. It just also means that sometimes we have to help folks find their own attorney general's office so that they can find the assistance they need more locally to them. So far this year, 30 reports have been referred to another unit, such as Consumer Protection or other state agencies.
Jennifer, question.
Yes.
I wonder if this data, we know it's not going to map exactly to what MSP is seeing, but I wonder if the trends, particularly when you look at 24 data reported recently to our 2024 data, if the county trends are similar to the trends in the 2024 MSP report. It might be worth comparing to see if, where they get the most reports are similar to where we get the most reports.
So I know Montgomery County is always the highest in the MCAC report, which it does reflect 2024. It does not currently reflect 2025. I would have to check for the other counties, but I know we're similar.
Okay.
But as you see on the 2025 graph, Baltimore City is actually much higher currently. So, but Montgomery County is still up there. I know Baltimore County, Anne Arundel County, and Prince George's County also tend to be higher, but I cannot tell you the order off of the top of my head from MCAC.
Okay. And just make a note. I'd be interested to see if our trends are similar to the statewide trends that MSP is seeing.
Yes.
You could probably make similar comparisons with the protected class breakdowns as well, as a sort of, we're seeing the same trends, or if, yeah.
Absolutely. And I do know that our protected class data maps fairly neatly on top of MCACs in order of like what we receive the most of. I don't know when it comes down to actual like percentages how close it is,
Okay.
but we get fairly similar results on the topic of just order.
Okay.
Speaking of protected classes, for 2025, again, we see race being one of the biggest classes that is targeted when it comes to incidents of hate as well as national origin. Those tend to get grouped together in bigger reports, but you can sometimes tell the difference in reports when they're received. As well, it kind of depends on how you break up the data. Religion is also very high. And then finally, the LGBT plus community tends to be the other big one. I will note again that gender and gender identity are higher on this one rather than sexual orientation. So depending on how you talk about the LGBT plus community, gay men tend to be the most targeted. If you look at MCAC's data, I believe, whereas we have gender and gender identity higher than the being targeted because of one's sexual orientation. So this graph shows 147 motivations for 117 reports made to our office. There are 104 reports that are not shown on this graph because they are either out-of-state callers or a protected class was unable to be determined when we attempted to contact them back. So those are not shown here as it throws the graph completely out of proportion. And then we do see a little bit of a change in how people are contacting our office. It's not quite as much proportionally for the hotline. People do still tend to call us the most. Email, actually, we get a lot more emails these days than we used to. And the portal continues to be used fairly regularly. Actually, when you combine both of these, we are getting a much higher number than we were last year. So we're seeing a big change in how people are contacting our office in some ways, even though the hotline by and far is the way people contact us the most. Moving on from data, and I promise I will have a spot for questions after this next section before we get into recommendations. But next steps for the commission, these are a couple of things that each of the committees have identified as where we will be heading in the new year. The Addressing Hate in Schools Committee is looking to research peer-to-peer interventions, as we've heard some really cool things that schools are doing across the state and across the country to combat hate within their schools. The Community Engagement Committee is working to develop a resource tree that will reflect the different resources available across the state within certain counties and sometimes within certain regions and nationwide that directly serve Maryland. The Law Enforcement Committee is working on assessing how to move forward with legislation to prohibit law enforcement from being involved with extremist groups while also protecting their right to free speech. Finding that balance is really important, especially when we know bills like that have been introduced in the past, and that's an ongoing and understandable concern that we want to recognize while we craft that suggestion. The online and cyberbullying community is working on a couple of things. One is finding a curriculum to educate students about online hate and bullying so that as kids are going online at younger and younger ages, they are able to recognize when something doesn't look quite right and when people are stepping out of the bounds of how we want to treat each other. They also are finalizing a moderating your online space handout. This is something that we hope to bring up in the new year and release then to help folks understand how they can control their online space to see less hateful content, as well as just to give folks the tools that they need to make your online experience enjoyable. Most of us are online in some way, shape, or form these days, and we should know what's available to us so that we can control that space and have it be a space that we enjoy rather than a space that ends in doom scrolling. And we are also working with our Civil Rights Division on creating a broader resource guide for that as well. So those will probably come out around the same time, but you will be hearing more about that, I swear. And then the Restorative Justice Committee is developing a community toolkit. This will help local communities, whether they be government officials, nonprofits that work within a community, or just very dedicated individuals, understand how they can create the frameworks that help prevent hate through community building, as well as responding to hate when it does occur, so that those tools can be built in from a community level, and putting that information out there for anybody to access to work towards a better community. Also, as we mentioned earlier, the work group is working towards identifying non-law enforcement agencies that can take reports of hate bias incidents. Where we are now is assessing what partnerships with organizations like 211 looks like so that we can try to craft something similar. And finally, we will continue to develop the data that comes in from the Hate Crimes Hotline and portal. And now I can open it for questions, even though we've gotten some great ones so far. I also wanted to give a moment for everybody to ask any questions that have come to mind in the process.
As we wait for hands, I did have a question, or really just a request with regard to our effort to identify other agencies who can take the hate bias incident reports. We do seem to be coalescing around 211. The Attorney General expressed some support for that at our last meeting. I think it's important that we at least have a phone call with 211 leadership so that they are aware. I know some of the committee members have reached out to folks at 211, but I want to make sure that they have a heads up that we are looking to them before the report is issued. We don't make a final recommendation on 211, but clearly we are transparent, and we have been in our meetings that we are leaning heavily towards 211. And so just want to give them a heads up and make sure we're aware of any, first impression concerns, and, just are ahead of that before we go out into the public in our written report and state a strong commitment to working towards 211 as the primary resource for this.
Absolutely. Deb.
Yeah, just it's just interesting to hear what some of the other groups are working on, and in terms of the hate in schools, the peer-to-peer intervention programs. We where I work, we have an incredibly successful, it's called a student-to-student peer-to-peer program. So I would love to just share that information with whomever you recommend. Doesn't have to be done right now. That's all.
Awesome.
That's great. And I would encourage other commissioners, as you hear your fellow committees, the work that they're doing, if you have any awareness or experience with any resources in those areas that you would like to share, please do so. Jennifer will, I think, share in this meeting. I know I've seen in our draft a commitment to doing more joint committee meetings, recognizing the wide breadth of experience that a lot of you have, and how the work even within work groups can sometimes overlap. And so we'll be looking for more opportunities to bring the committees together in the next calendar year.
Yes, absolutely.
So I don't see any other hands, so. Oh, nope, there's one.
Adelia. I
Sorry.
cannot hear
Yeah.
you. There you are.
Better now? Yeah. In terms of legislation, with all the committees working on their various areas, we're not trying to get any legislation passed, are we?
So that's the next section that I'm going into, is the
Okay.
few recommendations we have moving into the new year.
Got it. Okay.
Cool. And if anybody comes up with any other questions, please feel free to either drop them in the chat, send me an email, ask them later. We have plenty of time for discussion at the end of all of this, so do not hesitate to ask. Going into commission recommendations, because Adelia provided the perfect segue into that. So some of these you'll recognize from last year, the first one being actually defining hate bias incidents within our statute. As some of y'all will remember, this does not currently exist in Maryland statute, though it is a requirement that hate bias incidents be reported and data be collected on them by Maryland State Police. So this is the language that we came up with last year, explaining that a hate bias incident is an act of hostility or aggression that is directed at a person, group of persons, private property, or public property, is motivated in whole or substantial part by another person or group's actual perceived protected class as listed in the statute, and does not constitute a crime under state or federal law. And then we go through and give a couple of examples. To craft this as a refresher, we went through the handful of other jurisdictions that have definitions of hate bias incidents and created this to reflect similarly. So I believe one of them was New Jersey. There was a Oregon statute, and we used those to pull this together. Asha.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, okay. Awesome. So I have a question about this, and it's really experience based, and so I may be overthinking this. Right now, when jurisdictions report incidents, those incidents aren't yet verified, right? And so with respect to, or often I should say, the incidents are not verified, right? At the time that the report is received, we don't know yet whether a crime has actually occurred.
Mhm.
What are we characterizing incidents as during the pendency of that determination, right? So at the point at which it's an allegation, is it an alleged crime or is it an incident until,
Gotcha.
yeah,
So the report is taken either of a crime or a hate bias incident. When it is not confirmed, it is marked as inconclusive, no matter what. So it is an inconclusive hate crime report, an inconclusive hate bias incident report. And then as investigation continues, they are able to either say, yes, this happened, and it's a verified incident or crime, or no, this didn't happen in the fact of this was not motivated by hate. So this is an unfounded incident or crime.
got it. Okay, thank you.
Of course. Awesome. And then the other one we have it from last year is the updating the definition of sexual orientation. The current definition of sexual orientation in Maryland hate crimes law reads that sexual orientation refers to male or female heterosexuality, homosexuality, or bisexuality. And we as a society have recognized that sexual orientation is much broader than that. And as such, we would like to update the definition in Maryland law to reflect that and to be something that can grow as labels change often throughout history, and finding an actual definition that can grow with the human population would be more useful. So the one we came up with last year was sexual orientation means an individual's identity or another's perception thereof in relation to the genders to which the individual is sexually or emotionally attracted to. And then we give a couple of examples. The bill last year did not include the examples. We stuck with just that first sentence, and then used that second sentence as this is what we're trying to talk about. And it gave us a very easy way to explain that this is the beginnings of making sure that this covers more than just a handful of groups. And then finally, we made sure to include the fact that sexual orientation is distinct from gender identity, and linked and cited the statute that we pulled the definition for gender identity from. As we know, sometimes that causes confusion for folks that do not regularly talk about LGBT plus issues.
And before we move on from this one, Jennifer, I just want to again
Yes.
thank all of you who submitted testimony or provided either written or in-person testimony for this bill. The language is going to be, we believe, nearly identical this session. So you already have a bill that you could elevate within your respective organizations to see if we can expect you to continue to support. We certainly hope you can. We've already sort of, when we talked about lessons learned from last session, the plan is to introduce this bill very early this session, so we have an earlier hearing date, looking to secure both House and Senate sponsorship, and to begin to drum up support among the legislators to get behind this. Like obviously the LGBTQ caucus is a resource that we're looking to meet with to get their support for this sexual orientation definition change in particular. And so for those of you who are willing and able to support us in that effort, we would really appreciate it. As you know, the General Assembly looks to the community to ensure that their actions are consistent with, the needs, interests, wants of their constituents, their various constituencies. And so however many of you could stand up and show support for these changes, we would really appreciate it. I think I think it's very clear that the current definition of sexual orientation is very limited and outdated. And so we do want to make sure that we address that. And hate bias incidents, for as long as I've been doing this work, I mean, back to when we first started the AG's hate crimes task force, the distinction between a crime and an incident was confusing, and despite all of our efforts remains confusing, and even within law enforcement who's charged with reporting, taking reports and elevating reports. So we have to keep working on this very important distinction, because it really does impact our response as a state, our response as law enforcement agencies, our response as community, understanding as quickly as possible whether alleged action is a crime under state law or whether it is an incident. And we do think it's important to move those incidents sort of further away from law enforcement, who is not trained to respond to incidents, to non-criminal behavior, and has limited resources on responding to non-criminal behavior. We want our officers to focus on crimes, criminal investigation and the like. And we want to expand support for all the other organizations within the community who show up and assist victims who have been harmed by hate that does not constitute a crime. Yes, I see. Are you responding to me? I see a hand.
Orlando.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I'm now responding from the law enforcement perspective, just so we have clarity. We will, because even though we do get tied up, and I'll use the domestic violence, how we changed over that in the years. So what I want to be able to say is we still want to make it where we're responding to the potential of it to still be a crime, because even in a domestic, there's a difference between the actual domestic violence and a domestic incident. A domestic incident, we still have to go and take the report, even though there was no hands, and that came into play right after the OJ verdict. So we might still want to look at like just having something where for report purposes, because things can escalate, and you want to be able to show that there's an escalation to that as well.
Yeah.
No, thank you for that. Thank you for that clarity. And I think it goes also to Asha's point, is that most people don't know in the midst or early on whether certain behavior is a crime or, not a crime. And so we will need to keep law enforcement engaged and a resource. We always recommend initially, particularly if someone feels in danger, that they contact law enforcement. That is the primary first, call that they should make. But once we understand that an action is not, or behavior is not criminal, we need to have a robust source. And we also want to educate the community so that some actions, there is no confusion. If it's just a slur without any physical threat, then you know that there's a place you can go and you can get resources to help you deal with that, because those can be harmful as well, even if they don't, and they usually don't rise to a crime. So did I see another hand come up while I was?
Yes, Major Phillips.
Okay.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. To Colonel Lilly's point, it is important, and I think that's what we've been doing in the regional trainings. On Friday, we stressed to law enforcement that there's a distinct difference between a crime and an incident, and we do the same for the public on Saturdays.
Absolutely. And I think those forums will also help in laying the groundwork for what we're trying to do here.
Yep. And the cards. Did you talk about the postcard?
That is coming very quickly. You're good. We've done a lot of work this year, and I frankly find that very exciting, that we are making steps to address this, not only on the policy front, though I do have one more thing to touch on there, but also in creating resources that people can actually use. So the other thing before I get to the postcards Anita mentioned is, as you all know, we live in a world where generative AI is being used for many reasons, good and bad. So people have found benefit in using AI in their day-to-day life. People have also found a way to use it for hateful activity. And as such, one of the recommendations coming out of the commission this year is that we want to make sure that as legislation is being introduced, that generative AI is considered and its impact on hate is considered. So ensuring that as the legislator moves forward in regulating AI and regulating online spaces and even in-person interactions, that this is considered, that there are very good uses and there also are very bad uses. It is a tool that we need to understand better, and we've already seen people misuse it in the state of Maryland, as we saw in Baltimore County in 2024, in Pikesville, where a principal had his voice deep faked to say some absolutely horrendous things that did in fact very much sound like him. Major Phillips, did you have something to add?
I did, just for the group's knowledge. If the AG's office or any other organization sees what they believe is a case involving AI, please contact the MCAC. We have the first AI task force in the nation able to handle these cases.
That's great
wow.
to know. That is very good to know.
Can we add that to our annual report? Because I think that's worth highlighting. This is just so new. I know that the General Assembly is going to be looking for every resource it can identify.
Let me reach out to leadership before we put that in the report. We're already overwhelmed. We're servicing local, state, and federal agencies, and we're even getting requests worldwide. So before we put it in the report, let me check with leadership and get back to you.
Absolutely. And I'll just make a similar request that if any of you, if any others of you have examples that you've seen of how AI has been used to perpetuate hate, I think it would be helpful for the General Assembly to have examples of what this looks like in real life. Katie.
Hey, good afternoon. Yeah, so last session in 2025, the revenge porn statute had to be changed because of AI. And so that had been a bill that the Women's Law Center testified on last year and the year before. It did pass. It was Katie Frey-Hester's, Senator Hester's bill out of Howard County. So it now incorporates with the statute of revenge porn when somebody uses AI to generate a fake depiction of someone in either committing an act of sort of sexual exploitation, using either partially AI and then the real portion of the person's body, that can be is considered now a crime. But they had to update the revenge porn statute because of AI, because there have been some cases of, I think it was a high school student in Howard County whose image was used, her face was used on a body of an AI image, and there was the state's attorney's office couldn't prosecute it. So that's one way that they've used in the legislative session, AI and kind of conforming our laws now to deal with this, sometimes good, as Jennifer said, and sometimes bad.
That's a very clear example, too, of what we're talking about, where the law didn't have space for these changes in technology.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. And I'll just say we will keep our eyes out. Next session, I imagine there'll be more of those types of bills proposed. And so, and ask that you all also keep an eye out. And to the extent that they are proposed to address hate crimes laws, let's make sure to try to circulate them amongst the team so we can be aware and evaluate it and submit testimony as we deem appropriate.
Absolutely. I will also, as many of y'all were aware during last session, I tend to try to keep track of those bills that are relevant specifically to the committees and the commission as a whole. So reiterating, absolutely, please share them so that we can continue to try to make efforts beyond our recommendations, beyond our specific recommendations, so that we can help create a safer Maryland. And then our last recommendation for this year that was mentioned briefly earlier is the front of a postcard for individuals reporting hate. It was created so people know what happens after they report an incident of hate, both criminal and non-criminal. A common issue that we run across is people feel like after reporting hate, especially if it's a hate bias incident, that nothing is done. And that frustration can lead to not reporting in the future. which causes issues for everybody. There's no ability to offer resources. There's no ability for us to understand how the landscape is changing because of the underreporting issue that already exists and could be potentially exacerbated. And then people still don't know what resources that they can get. So the law enforcement committee worked on creating a postcard that we have put together. The front explains the differences between hate crimes and hate bias incidents, what happens when a report is made, what the protected classes are, and the rights and protections. And this is something that we can update as we find other avenues to report hate bias incidents, but also remains true of folks have a right to report, so that law enforcement takes that report and then it is reflected in our annual data and why we have that annual data. So providing that explanation. And then the back goes through some standard resources. So the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights, the Maryland Crime Victims Compensation Program, and the Crime Victims Resource Center, as well as the Pro Bono Counseling Project for mental health support, so that folks know who to call when something happens, when they need to just talk to somebody to help process an awful event. And then finally, information on how to contact our office and receive further, more specific resources. So providing that chance not only to, when something occurs and they're reporting it, be able to say, here's a very basic guide to what's going on, as well as who you can reach out to for further assistance. But also, here's somebody you can reach out to that may be able to help you immediately. So we put this together for that purpose specifically, which is different from our one-pager and our pamphlet that we've put together in the past that are just more generally about hate, but rather by somebody who's reporting in the moment.
And Jennifer, as you were describing this, it occurred to me too, that paper is good for some constituents, but we should also figure out how to make it available through like a QR code, so that it can be circulated more broadly and in a format that,
Absolutely.
Some constituents prefer. Because I'd be curious to know if law enforcement, because sort of similarly with the Sexual Assault Evidence Kit Policy and Funding Commission, we have developed resources for law enforcement to hand out. And I just wonder, like, how many hard copy pamphlets are they having to like carry around and hand out, to folks? And if, what are some more efficient, effective ways to make sure that the information that's developed for various types of crimes are readily available and accessible? So.
And I think the first place that we can do that is putting it with the other resources on the portal. And then we can help agencies as needed figure out what is the best way for their communities to share this. And on that note, questions and discussions. Those are our 4 major recommendations for this year, as well as the numerous other things that we have been working on for long-term opportunities to address hate in our communities. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and I can pull it back up if we need to go backwards somewhere.
I don't see any hands. Do you want to talk about, did I miss a hand?
No, it's in the chat. Orlando was, he said he was going to ask about the card and having a pamphlet that can be given out from police outreach units at community events. So we do have a pamphlet, as well as, I don't have a copy of a pamphlet, but I do have a copy of one of our one-pagers, which are slightly easier to print because you don't have to fold them. So depending on what works better, I'm happy to share those files with you, as they may be useful for outreach units at community events.
Do you want to talk about the process for finalizing the report?
Yeah, so we will be getting the report out to everybody later this week, which at this point means tomorrow because it is Thursday. So we will be getting a copy of the report out to everybody so that the whole commission can review it. And we will set a deadline in the middle of next week as to get feedback. Our report is due December 1, and despite what you think, sometimes it is the middle of November, so we are getting fairly close to that deadline. And also Thanksgiving is coming soon. So we recognize that, and we'll give you everybody a chance to review it by the middle of next week. Send any feedback you have so that we can incorporate it into the report, and then we will finish the final edit so that we can submit it by December 1. That will be sent out via email. Yeah, I think that covers it. Did I miss anything?
I don't think so. Just, comments or red line, I think are probably the easiest to digest.
Yeah.
So thank you guys for making some time in your schedules over the next week to give us feedback on the report. We have been pretty good in terms of our timing last year. And as Jennifer went over, it's a lot of good information to share. And the focus really is, I think, from the legislature standpoint, reintroducing our legislative proposal from last session, highlighting the need to pay attention to AI and its impact on hate crime statutes and whether there needs to be some changes made there. As well as giving them an update on what to look for in terms of the committee's output next session. So, I mean, you guys are working on a lot of things, and we'll have at least one new resource. Well, I guess 2 new resources potentially this year, if you include the other online protecting your online space tool. That can be used in this space, and we'll make sure to keep, send links to everyone so you can send those out to your various networks once they are finalized, and just I look forward to continue to see what the committees put out for the commission's review. I know the other thing that we've been talking about is, as we have been doing the regional forums and participating in these committees, we keep meeting individuals who are doing this work in their regions or with their different organizations. And we've been thinking about how to bring those individuals before either the full commission or within work groups to talk about what they're doing. And so we are going to be, I think you'll likely see some more commission meetings outside of the quarterly meetings to allow for us to basically receive presentations on some of the work that folks are doing in their specific, in their jurisdiction. So we can use those as just examples, best practices, et cetera. So if you have recommendations for, like Deb has shared one recommendation of a program that she'd like to be put before the commission, but we'd love to invite representatives from the various programs. If you're aware of something that's working really well or something that's novel or just that you think folks should be aware of as a resource, please let Jennifer know, and then we'll see if we can invite them to a meeting, and we'll try to schedule just a couple of additional commissioner meetings outside of the quarterly meetings that we will invite everyone to, really just to receive those presentations. So give some thought to that. All right, let's see what else. Well, I guess are we at next steps and adjournment? Are we at that part of the agenda?
I do, unless somebody has any burning questions or comments or concerns.
Do we have any more committee meetings before the end of the calendar year?
Not currently. I believe the Community Engagement Committee still has their December meeting on the books, but otherwise nothing is scheduled, particularly as we wrap up reporting. None of the committees have a meeting before the reports do.
Okay. This does sort of feel like the time where you're like, oh, the year's over. See you next year. It's November, and then, the fall holidays, as Asha has said, and then the winter holidays, and then session. So again, I think the priority for us as a body is to review the report, provide your feedback as timely as possible, and then to be preparing for thinking about how you might be able to support the committee's legislative proposal again next session. We need all the help we can get. We are still, I think Delegate Vogel is still doing the House bill. Is that correct, Jennifer? And we're still trying to identify a Senate sponsor. We're making plans to get before the LGBTQ caucus and the other specialty caucuses to rally their support for the bill. And yeah, and then going to keep an eye out for other legislation that impacts the commission's work. So I think we're transitioning into preparing for legislative session. And those of you who are advocates, I know you mentally too are probably doing the same in terms of thinking through what you're likely to see, where you'll be like offensive on offense, and then where you will be on defense. And so we are also doing the same here. So for those of you who we don't talk to, seeing no more hands or comments in the chat, I will let folks go a little early. And just thank you again for all of your hard work. Keep an eye out for the draft report. Thank you in advance for your prompt feedback on that. And again, if you have ideas or thoughts or strategies for our legislative proposal, please don't hesitate to reach out on that. But we'll certainly be reaching out to you as we begin to schedule meetings with legislators and they ask for additional representatives from the commission to come and meet with them and talk about why these are important proposals to advance. So thank you. Happy holidays, everyone. We appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you both. Great presentation, Jennifer.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Have a great holiday.
Thank you. Happy
Thank you,
holidays.
everyone. Bye.
Holiday pie.